My name's Monk Rowe, and I'm very, very pleased to have Wendell Harrison with me today. And requires sort of a long introduction. Saxophonist and composer and record producer and community activist, and probably other things too. Congratulations. Kudos on your career so far.
Oh, thank you. It's an honor to talk about my legacy and all my years in struggle, as it was.
I'm struck by the fact that you just used the word struggle, because I usually try to think of a question to start with. And I was going to ask, do you think of your career in music and community involvement as a struggle?
Yeah, well, the reward is very rewarding, but like anything that's worthwhile, it's a challenge. That's another word, challenge. You have the many problems that you have to work out in terms of presenting this music and actually archiving it and documenting it and trying to get it out to a wider audience. It's a wider audience, and which is recordings and CDs, and nowadays you're talking about streaming and all kinds of different formats. I'm doing a video now of my legacy, which is like 65 years of activities, and so oftentimes I look at it as a challenge and struggle, and a problems, that you solve, and you have to be consistent, and you have to garner all kinds of help, around your community. You have to reach out. It's really a job,
I read something about when you had the publication, the Tribe publication, and you had used the word relegate. You have to learn how to relegate some things, or you're going to lose your mind.
Yeah. You have to get help, expedite. The different responsibilities, because I'm a saxophone player. I'm chasing notes. You know what I mean? In this quest of playing the saxophone and dealing with the jazz language, I have to call on different other avenues of like the media, publishing, record people that's an expert in that particular area and have skills in that particular area. I have to actually create a network of well, Eddie Harris said, create an army of sergeants, that can help, because we was very close. The great Eddie Harris, we was very close. We recorded and toured together for a long time. And every city, Eddie he would call a sergeant or help. In every state, city, state, he would have people helping him dealing with concerts and workshops. And so it was easy for him when every time he would tour, he would get main big engagements from, let's say, big agencies out of New York, but he would always call on these people in these cities to help set up a tour. He would get a skill. Same when I worked with Hank Crawford. Hank Crawford would have an agency called the Shaw Artists out of New York, that did with major, and so they would give him about 5 different major festivals, but in between the festivals, it was like holes, and it's a hole in the artery.
Yeah,
So
it's hard to keep a band together also when you have all those holes in the schedule.
yeah, yeah. So, but each depending on where we were, he had his road managers that called different little venues in these different little cities and whatnot that were filling the gaps, you know. So we was working constantly,
Mm.
you know, constantly working. It's like a network that you have to set up. Being an artist, especially independent artist, you have to have a network, just like a record company. Record company has a net, like let's say for instance, Blue Note Records, you know, or Columbia Records. They'll put a release out, but they have they contract with many other distributors and record companies to actually get that record out all over the world. Back in the day, when the record companies was Paramount, back
Right.
in I'm talking about 30 years ago.
Yes.
You know, they were actually you get one record, and they would put that record out. Once they got going, they put that record out in 3 days all over the world. All over the world in 3 days. In 3 days, you were a known entity, you know. And
Let
you
me
could work.
can I take you back for a moment? I'm wondering if there was a specific recording or incident where music got into your head. Do you remember one of the first things that made an impression on you musically as a kid?
As a kid.
As a kid.
It was torture. As a kid. Well, I had a different experience probably. I played piano at 5 years old. My parents started me playing the piano because I was a nervous kid running around. And they would take me to the shopping, and I was so crazy. I would just pull all the groceries off the shelves and put them on the floor. You know, I was hard to contain. You know, and concentration was like a gnat. I couldn't concentrate on anything. You know, so when people say, "Well, give him a piano, take him," he needs discipline. He needs to be able to concentrate. So I started playing piano at the age of 5, and I actually I took piano lessons, and it helped. So they said, "Oh, my grandfather said, it's doing good." So I was 8 years old. Said, "Give him a clarinet." He bought me a clarinet. See how that works. So I got a clarinet. I'm playing it to this day. This day, clarinet.
All right.
And so I started playing that in elementary school. But the thing is, because I had to sit still and decipher notes on the page, that was a job for me. It was a job, you know. I didn't like it, you know. But I got I concentrated, and when I concentrated, I got rewards, you know. And then when I got in middle school, the girl we had these different performances. They called them assemblies, where like we would play for plays, and we played for dance shows, and so I got attention because I was playing at that time. I was playing first clarinet, and the girls would come up and talk to me because I was on display. You know, oh, I like that. You know, this is what a way to go. You know, I'm getting attention now. You know, so that the reward, if I practiced good and got these shows and stuff, I would get accolades and whatnot, and I would get attention from the girls to say, "This works." This is work. So I started playing more, practicing. Then when I got to high school, I met guys that was playing bebop. You know, like I don't know if you know Charles McPherson.
Yes, I
and
do.
Lonnie Hilliard, Roy Brooks, and those guys was in high school. They was like 2 years ahead of me, but they was playing every like 7:30 in the morning. They would be playing in the boiler room. This is back in the 50s, because jazz wasn't allowed to be played in the band room because the guy was nervous. The band director was nervous. He couldn't stand to hear Charlie Parker's Cherokee and Donald Lee and all of that stuff. And these guys were playing the carbon copy of the record, you know. And
Learning, learning by ear, is that right?
Kind of sort of, they could read. See, we was always at that particular time, we was required to read. We reading marches, classical stuff, and everybody was required to take private lessons there. I'm talking about the 40s and 50s to get in the band. In other words, in order to get into the band, whether it's the B band, A band, you had to have a private teacher. That was the requirement. So then when you joined the band, they would teach you these. You could play these tunes, but it wasn't no thing about learning to play the instrument. You know, it was learning the music, not the instrument. The instrument was it's understood that you could play and you could read. So the playing in the band is about interpretation, learn to interpret, you know, because he's playing music from Italy, Germany, all over, you know, wide repertoire of music, you know. It's very good educational system, you know, because it introduced you to different cultures and whatnot. So in terms of these guys were playing music and they would write out different, they could write. They learned how to write. Because they was studying with the great Barry Harris.
Oh.
You know, and they had older musicians that was living in, this is Detroit. They had older musicians that were working in Detroit, and they would go to New York to record for Blue Note or Columbia, whatever it would be, a Riverside, Impulse, and then they come back to Detroit and work because of the auto industry. The economy was so big here; it was hot back in the 50s. You know, and people was making money, and people were working. You know, people were buying homes and forming businesses and creating businesses, and so the infrastructure and the environment was very lucrative, actually prolific back in those days. You know, people was coming from the South as well as Poland, far as Poland, they're coming to work in the factory. People like Berry Gordy, you know, he was working in the factory, and he started Motown. You know, a lot of business was started as a byproduct of the auto industry. You know,
was there a point that you said to yourself and maybe to your parents, your family, that I think I'm going to make a career of this?
Well, first of all, I had to stop playing the clarinet. Because the kids, well, they were about 17, 18. I was like maybe 15, 14, 15, you know. Say, well, Benny Goodman is all right. They got a young baby boy that's trying to be Benny Goodman. We want to check. You need to listen to Charlie Parker if you want to play. Because I was astounded. I was surprised they could play real fast tempos, man. They could really play. And it sounded like this. One guy, carbon copy of Dizzy Gillespie. Charles McPherson was sounding exactly like Bird, you know, under the tutelage of Barry Harris, you know. And so I was so amazed at that. I begged my mother. I said, Mama, I got to have an alto saxophone. I got to play. I'm studying Charlie Parker. And she said, I don't know now. Well, you've been playing for piano lessons and bought you a clarinet. You got clarinet lessons going. Now you want a saxophone. So she thought about it. And she came back and said, well, I'll get you a saxophone, but you got to have a job. So she got a paper route. I started delivering papers. And then with that, if that wasn't bad enough, I got a stock boy job, stocking food, in a grocery. I became a grocery boy. At about, I was like 13, about 13. And so I did that, and she got this Martin alto saxophone. And I started playing, practicing these, because they would give me ideas to play, and they gave me tunes that I had to learn. I had to build up my jazz vocabulary, repertoire. And at that point, I started playing with them, but other musicians or students of jazz that was already playing, they discovered that I was playing saxophone and I was pretty good, So they asked me to join their band. And they were playing like little dances, like proms and weddings and community stuff. And they would get a lot of work because they was kids, they were young. It was like 17, 18, And
what would the song list have been like? And do you recall how much money you first made, your first gig, your first paid gig?
The song list was amazing because back in those days, they were dancing, social dancing. When you play for a dance, there's social dancing. We played Out of Nowhere. We played Caravan. We would play, for instance, we would play High the Moon. But then we discovered that Charlie Parker wrote a tune on High the Moon and he called it Ornithology. So we, at the same time, as I was playing these tunes, I would go home with this other group. We practiced with this other group at school. Not go home, I go to school. And the other group was playing Ornithology and Hot House and Donna Lee. And I discovered that it was the same as those standards that we was playing at the dances. So we would play these tunes, but then I would play the bebop tunes, and they would play the traditional Cole Porter, Rodgers and Hart melody, and we would play the bebop tunes along with them. That's how we learned them together. Learned the bebop, and we learned the original tunes together. Contrafat, they call it contrafat.
Yes. Well, were rhythm and blues creeping into the things that people wanted to hear at that time?
No, this was like rhythm and blues. You know what the original rhythm and blues is? The original rhythm and R&B was rhythm changes. Like I Got Rhythm. And you had about 1,000 tunes that was written basically on that format. It's modified, from one tune to the next. But basically that, okay, you got I Got Rhythm. The form is, and it's like a 32 bar.
32 bars, yes.
32 bar form. Okay, so many tunes back in the 30s and 40s that was based on that 32 bar, a form with different variations, different keys, and then sometimes the jazz musicians introduce substitution changes and whatnot, because they was trying to deal with their sound, more of a modern progressive style. And so that was like the rhythm format. And then you had the blues format, which is a 12-bar format. And you had 1,000, a million.
You could play the blues all night.
Yeah, a different blues. I mean, so many different kinds of blues. You had blues with bridges. You had blues, you got 12-bar blues, and sometimes they would extend it to like play 12 bars and then play a 4-bar interlude. You know, yeah, it had all different kinds of form. But that was the popular sound of that particular time. And then at the same time, we was dealing with rock and roll. Frankie in the Valley, Frankie, let's see, Chuck Berry, Little Richard. Okay, Little Richard. You know, that was, but it's still the 12-bar blues.
Yes.
Still the 12-bar, and sometimes it's like Ray Charles. Sometimes the 12-bar blues would be extended to 16 bars, you know, and then you would hear, if you play for church, you hear the same format in churches, playing the same form of change. In fact, church is only in the Baptist church, they usually adapt to the music or sound that's popular, and they put spiritual words on top of that. You know, if you have a big popular tune, that everybody that's in the spirit of everybody, in the psyche of everybody, they would actually put, somebody would construct a tune that's similar chord-wise and put lyrics, spiritual lyrics on top of it. And it would really serve the purpose of church. Everybody felt good. Oh, that really sounds good. and they would really go out and buy church music, but they buy the same music.
Yeah.
You know, it's the same format. So the original R&B, rhythm and blues, was like popular music, 40s and 50s. And I mean the popular music, not only the blues stuff like Little Richard but I'm talking about Cole Porter, Rodgers and Hart, those Gershwin, those are the major composers at that particular time. And we took those tunes and dressed them up. Instead of doing swing, we playing bossa nova, we play Latin, we play shuffles and change the beat. And
Did your piano lessons help make sense of chords, chord changes, and so forth once you really got into the quest to be an improviser?
Oh, wow, that's profound. That's a profound statement. The question that you have, everything begins with and ends with the piano. By me playing piano at 5 years old, because what that enabled me, the piano was my friend. In other words, you know, I knew about the piano. So when I got the saxophone and I started playing these ideas on the saxophone, these guys would take me and say, well, you got to go to the piano and work these tunes out first before we go any further. You have to learn the changes on the piano, you know, because I could read piano music, you know, but it wasn't about the music at that time. It was about chords, learning how to build a chord, like a major, minor, augmented, and then after you do that, learn how to voice it so it won't sound so crazy. you know. So everything in jazz from a practitioner revolves around the piano. The piano is your source, because when you can play the piano, you play chords and then you play the ideas against the chords on the piano. You can see it, but you can't see it with a trumpet or saxophone. Yes. or those other instruments. The piano gives you a graphic knowledge of what you're doing, you know. So a good musician always have to have knowledge of the piano, you know, because that's your format, that's your source. When you go to figure out a tune, you go to the piano. You don't go to your horn.
Yeah.
You go to the piano, figure it out, and then you pick up an instrument after you work it out on your piano. After you work it out on the piano, you see how it makes sense. You have to see the flow of the chords and stuff like that, and see where it's going and where it's ending, and how the melody fits in with the chords and stuff. And then you go to the piano and go to your instrument and start playing. Another thing, when you start playing and orchestrating for a big band or ensembles and stuff, you go to the piano and say, well, man, the ensemble is just like my 10 fingers.
That's right. Know? I got the trumpet, you know, here's the saxophones.
right.
Over here.
This is the brass over here and the reeds over here.
Yeah.
You know, and then you learn how to score. You put all this stuff in the score. That's a whole different thing. I went to the conservatory before I moved to New York. I was like 18 years old. I went to the conservatory and I learned keyboard harmony, solfeggio, and all that, you know. And I learned how to write European music, you know, Stravinsky, or let's say Beethoven, or Mozart. I learned how to put it together.
Yeah.
And so now, as I said, well, how can I learn Duke Ellington, Count Basie, or Oliver Nelson? He said, well, we don't teach that here. This is in the 50s, see? Jazz wasn't even considered music in a lot of camps, you know. Yes. It was like rap music today, you know. It's like, oh, that's a whole different world, you know. So I said, well, you know, that's my interest. So I went to New York and I learned from other musicians. I was working with Duke Ellington, working with Count Basie and big bands, Ray Charles, and it was writing. It was writing for different groups and whatnot. Because, like, if you go to New York, you could, at that particular time, you could actually, if you could solo, that was good. But you had to be able to read. You had to be able to see. You know, you could your sight reading. You had to be sight. You had to sight read.
Right.
And you had to be adaptable. You could adapt a feeling, and you had to be able to solo. But if you could write the arrangements, that will give you another source of income. You know, so you learn how to score and write charts for a singer. You start out with a singer. You know, actually, you start out with a 6-piece to 5-piece horn section with rhythm. Mm-hmm. And you start learning how to orchestrate stuff and treating the brass one way and treating the reeds another way, you know, and making music. And you start getting jobs writing for singers, and then occasionally you get big band work and whatnot. See, all this was really supporting yourself as a musician. You had to do all these, I call it like life jackets, you know, like you could play, if you could play, because a lot of bands just wanted the solos, you know, because guys just couldn't read so much, but he could solo.
Yeah, those days were over. I wanted to ask you, this was, you went there in 1960?
60, yeah.
Okay. In 1959 and 61, sort of surrounding, we had these records, The Shape of Jazz to Come, Giant Steps, Kind of Blue. And then in 61, we had We Insist, Max Roach, Free Jazz by Ornette Coleman. My question is, we look at these albums now as iconic and artistic achievements. Did they have any impact on your musical thinking at that time?
Oh my God, yes, they did. Because when I went to New York, I was very regimented in a way, because I was like into bebop and playing the changes. Everything is about changes, and reading. But then being in New York, we had a variety of different jazz concepts. They called it jazz, but it's different concepts of under the umbrella of jazz, And they called me to do a job with Sun Ra. You remember Sun Ra?
Yes, indeed. I was going to ask about Sun Ra.
So that was frightening for me, I went with Sun Ra.
When you first arrived, it was frightening to you. Like, did you go to a rehearsal first, or did you just land in a gig?
Oh, when I first moved to New York, I started working with Grand Dream. That was with guitars from Blue Note Records. He played bebop guitars, and he had Bob Crenshaw, Bob Cunningham, and Ben Dixon on drums, and I would tour. And then he got an organ. Then sometimes we would play gigs with an organ. And then I got gigs with Hank Crawford. Now this is 63. But meanwhile, I would take little gigs with Sun Ra, with John Gilmore playing saxophone. Actually, John Gilmore had with Train. Art Blakey. He went with Art Blakey. And Sun Ra was using Farrell, but Train was calling him all the time. John Coltrane was calling him all the time, So there I was, about the same age. So they tried me out. So Sun Ra said, "Don't play. I don't want you to solo. Just play the notes because he's writing notes and I could read. Because and he said, when you solo, I don't want to hear a bunch of exercises. I don't want to hear a bunch of exercises. I want to hear imagery. I say, wow, imagery, what is that? So he said, think of a Godzilla throwing a lady off the Empire State Building, or think about a nice, pretty lady going walking the beach, or think about some warm soup, what kind of feeling does that have? Project that kind of feeling, or project a train wreck or a car wreck, what I mean? Put that into your expression and the emotions of it. Talk about play the emotions and the spiritual feeling of that.
And may I ask if that's the first significant time that the idea of emotion and expression was introduced to you and came out of your horn?
Yeah, no, I had to work on it. He was telling me how to play and how to think. And he's talking about the spiritual stuff, He's talking about emotions. But I had to think, what can I play that would arouse a feeling, And what kind of feeling would it be? Can I do it with a squeak? You know.
Yes, and would
Can
that be,
can I do it with a squeak or a honk, you know, can I growl in the honk? I learned how to growl, two, three different kinds of growls and stuff, you know.
yes,
Because music is very emotional. And if you have the skills to project and draw the feeling out of the music, you know, it affects your listener. It means more to your listener.
does it change the idea of a mistake?
No mistakes. But I mean, you have to get it like Miles, even like Miles, there's no such thing as a wrong note. Okay.
Okay, we're good. So
That's
you were talking about the idea of wrong notes and mistakes and how that has changed over the years, because going back to the piano, how you can see, like, I'm playing C sharp over a G chord and it has that certain sound.
Right.
At the time you might have thought, well, that's a mistake, but maybe no longer.
Right. Well, the thing is, wrong notes and wrong chords, it's not, it depends on how you play that note rhythm wise. And if it's going to be the last note, if that note you're concerned with, is it the last note or the first note? If it's the first note, you can resolve it. You know what I mean? And if it's a note, if you don't want to resolve it, you can put a chord with it to make it good, to make it fine. You know, and start, and it could that be a start of another phrase. That note, that wrong note might be a start of another phrase. It depends on how you treat that note that's in question. You know, depends on how you treat it. And as a jazz musician, you learn how to play these notes and make sense out of these notes. Because as a jazz musician, you're making mistakes all along, because you're not playing things that you played. You're always reaching for new phrases and whatnot that you haven't played before. I mean, that's just the nature of who we are. So we always, if you're going to use the word mistake, we always changing mistakes and making it into something that's acceptable, you know. So if you when you look back again and say, well, there's no such thing as a mistake. I wasn't finished. I wasn't finished. So, and the thing is, our ego is built on changing stuff, changing ideas, changing phrases and stuff, and really making something that's really acceptable to the ear, you know, because the note that's in question might get a emotional reaction. It's useful. You might get a spiritual reaction. You know, you might say it's wrong note, but what does that do? It's only wrong if something's been documented for years. It's like sheet music, a standard or something like that, and it's been documented for years. And you plan, and you don't play the note you don't play the copyrighted note, the copywritten note, the note that's in the let's say lead sheet, you know. Well, then that's wrong. It'd be wrong if you're trying to perform the same music as is. That's wrong.
Reminds me of Miles when he played Autumn Leaves, and instead of going ba 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 da. He went ba 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 da.
Yeah, flat
Right?
five.
Yeah, and you think, well, Miles can do that.
Yeah, well, you know, and it reinforces his identity in his approach. You know, he does that. You know, Miles, and so like, soon as somebody else plays the same way, he said, "Oh, you copying Miles? Oh, you playing Miles?" You know, you know. Same with Train. Train, different ideas Train had. You know, at that time, sometimes Train would play. Train made about 4 or 5 different transitions in his playing. I was studying Sonny Rollins, and I started listening to Train when I was 17, 18 years old in Detroit. You know, and I was copying these ideas. Train did this. Oh wow! Played this. Well, he was with Miles Davis. He's playing around about midnight. He was playing Shiny Stockings or Hoagie Carmichael, Stardust.
Stardust.
You know, so I would, wow, the way he treated those that language. I mean, he had his own language. So at that time, I had to leave Barry Harris because he didn't want to hear it in his house. You know, I don't play that in my house. No Train in my house. I don't want no Looney Tunes in my house. You know, I said, oh man, and Train was hot at that time. Train was like, I mean, every young musician wanted to play, you know, like that. We was playing Bird, you know, but here Train came along. Train came along, and that was the new sound. And this was like doing civil rights. It was like the soundtrack of the community or the nation, because the Train projected struggle. He projected struggle. He projected a lot of emotions in his playing. So we gravitated toward that because we tried to be. It's all about emotion, you know. And he was projecting that. So in bebop is more like, bebop was more romantic. But Trey wasn't in a romantic frame of mind, you know, with all these riots and stuff going on.
What was his frame of mind for you?
Civil unrest. Well, he was very spiritual, but the thing is, a musician plays the life of the environment. He was affected from the environment. You know, I'm talking about people like Martin Luther King and all the struggles that went through in terms of civil rights, voting rights, women. We struggle with that today. You know, same thing. It never ends. Then everybody was very spiritual too at that particular time, because you had to be to play the music. I think you had to have a spiritual awareness about you. You know, these guys had their own way of doing things. Even Sonny Rollins, Sonny was changing too, but he was very rooted. He became a star playing the bebop thing, and it was hard for him to do too much changing, because he was saying what Yusuf Lateef. Well, Yusuf Lateef just said he changed. Yusuf did. Yusuf was the one of the profound saxophone players in the 40s, you know, that changed. And he's very, well, I'm saying profound, he was very popular, you know. And his playing changed quite a bit, but he always had, up until recently, he always had that bebop approach. Same with Sonny Rollins. Sonny came after him, you know.
Wendell, I'd like to get an issue and start with a quote. The issue is the role of jazz in society and how society affects jazz. And this is a quote from Max Roach that was connected to the We Insist Freedom Now LP, 1962. And he said, "We American jazz musicians of African descent have proved beyond all doubt that we're master musicians of our instruments. Now what we have to do is employ our skill to tell the dramatic story of our people and what we've been through." So my question to you is, did that music like Max Roach's affect you? And did you feel that it was a direction you wanted to go in or felt compelled to go in?
I admired Max. Sun Ra was more influential in terms of, he affected my direction more than Max. Train did. I like Mingus, but everybody was doing this, had the same purpose, but different ways of approaching to try to play freer, trying to play freer. And this meant, in terms of changing the format, like for instance, Horace Silvers, he just played, Horace Silvers was very popular. He was a business guy, you know, and he played and wrote tunes that sold. He had his own publish. He was one of the first Black musicians that had his own publishing company, you know. And he was more interested in selling his music to the populace, the world. Max or Train, that's for instance, Train was more academic in terms of projecting the spiritual idea of and the reflection of the pain and suffering of the community, and bringing attention to these events that was happening down south, like Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia, and whatnot. Bringing the events, he was telling the musical story of what was happening back, and that kind of like influenced me, you know, because I produced a record called Evening with the Devil in 1970, which had Mary Had an Abortion. This is Mary Had an Abortion, which is a poem, you know. But the first poem was written by myself, which was a reflection of Africa being married and having an abortion of a people, undeveloped people, you know. And that was the first poem that was recited by me, and then I employed a group of actors. It was something like The Last Poets, which wrote a tune, Mary Had an Abortion.
Yeah, guess what I was listening to about 2 hours ago? That song. And I was trying to figure out the first thing I hear. I think it's that particular cut. And the first thing I hear, I'm trying to figure out, now what is that? Is that a acoustic bass with a bow? Or is that what that was? Very mysterious.
He was laying down on the bridge.
I see.
On the bridge of the bull, and he's blowing and playing. So you heard the poem?
I did. And and then I was listening to the rest of the song, and I had this question here. I'll read my question because I think you answered it. Is it possible to play out or free, but not play aggressively?
Yeah.
Yeah, because on that cut, I heard it. I'm not sure if which trumpet player it was, but at any rate, it was like a little roadmap of different styles and I wondered what the music looked like, because there was times where everybody was playing together, like you wrote a musical marker. And I almost pictured the recording session like maybe people were improvising, it was freer, and then you're cueing in, okay, we're moving on, here's the cue or something. Am I like hallucinating here?
No, back in this is like the way we played when we did a concert. In fact, this record is like from a concert. In other words, when we did a concert, it was a continuous music going from one tune to the next. And you started with Mary Had an Abortion. That was real fast. It was real fast tempo, right? Real fast tempo, and it was going down in the chorus was going down in minor third, like a B flat major, the G major to E major to D flat major, repeated over and over and over again. And we writing lines on this. We play da, 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 da. And we kept on playing, and then that was the first time, and then we put the poetry on top of that, and then we settled down, and we went into a tune called "Where Am I?" This is talking about we're in this new land over here. You know, this new land, this new land of North America. Where am I? And it's like a tune of discovery. You know, everything is cerebral and whatnot. Later on, we wrote words to where am I now that I'm in this new day? How do I get to know a change in me? How do I get to know you? Just say I am. That we did it. Well, I wrote that. Harold McKinney wrote that a little later, you know. But the tune music keeps developing. We had different pieces over the years. We had go revisit these tunes and add different things to them, different tunes and different melodies, lyrics and whatnot. Change different chords and whatnot. Keep adding to it. Now after Where Am I? It goes into a tune called Angry Young Man, which is in 6/8. But the same changes as Mary Had an Abortion, but it's in 6/8 now. Instead of real fast, we're in 6/8. Dee da dee da dee da dee dum 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 dum. Bit little bit bit up but be dee da dee dee dee. Same thing. And so the same format, but played different. And at the end of this format, at the end of this tune, Marcus Belgrave takes a solo on that, and I take a solo in 6/8. Same changes going down. We playing these on this particular cut. We playing actual changes, pretty much. We playing that major to the G to the E to the D flat, and find out how many ways we can manipulate, negotiate.
Negotiate, I like that word.
Chords, you know what I mean? So and then that settles down into a tune called Consciousness, which talks about police brutality, which is the angry young man, or consciousness, you know. And this back in the day, he was talking about purple haze. Did you hear that? The purple haze?
I didn't hear that part.
The poem, it talks about Irish nightstick. He'd been hit on the head with an Irish nightstick, and so it's a whole poem that deals with the whole police culture, you know.
Yeah.
Just a couple of minutes, but about 2-3 minutes. Then it goes into a classical, the finale.
Yes.
Finale is a classical sound.
That really struck me. Like, what's the idea behind that? like all of a sudden there's these mostly major chords. And if they were played by a string section, it could have been Haydn or something.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Why did you do that?
But we in the world, we in the European world. We in the European, we reflect in the environment. You know what I mean? And it's a mistake, majestic. It has a majestic sound, you know, and talk about King James and the whole regime, the whole environment, or the whole world that reflects. You know what I mean? And the thing is, Monk, it's just a sweet. That's just a sweet. This is an idea. It's an idea.
May I read a quote from you connected to this recording? You said, now this is 1972, correct?
Right.
We hope to bring out points, situations, and events that are happening in our communities by way of music, poetry, and dance, and rapping to the people. You cannot divorce art from its root culture and expect it to be relevant for both the artist and his culture.
That's what I was trying to say after.
Yes.
That's what I was trying to say, you know, but that's what the artist, to me, that's what an artist is. Like a painter, or musician, or sculptor, or they're affected by the environment. Now you have other artists that just play, or create art for the purpose of marketing and selling. You say, well, I'm gonna create this music because I know I'm gonna put this music together in a way where it's gonna reach a certain market, and I'm gonna sell it to this market, you know, because I know what they want. So you have artists, like smooth jazz artists, maybe you want today, you know, that create music for that because they know they can get a lot of money. They can get a deal to put it out, and they can make people feel good, you know, make people. It's like antidote, or it's the same as selling liquor. You know, it makes you feel good. You know what I mean? And it's party time, and anesthesia. You know, in a way.
Yes. Benny Powell said. Benny Powell. I'm sorry. Benny Powell said, "No art was ever created by happy people."
Yeah.
Wow.
Wow.
That's heavy.
That's heavy. That's really heavy. Oftentimes we are thinkers. That word happy, I struggle with the word happy, you know, because when I'm writing music, I'm satisfied, and I'm at my best when I'm writing music, and I feel secure with myself as a musician when I'm writing, and it's very rewarding when I get the music played back, you know. Me as a person, I'm not a comedian. My life is not a comic. You know, when you say happy, that means jovialness and but I don't think we're not happy. If you use the word happy, we're not happy all the time as a human being, as human beings. He just said that, I think he just said that to point out certain instances where we have because our spirit is constantly moving. Our spirit is constantly changing and whatnot. Depends on how we respond to our environment. You know, we don't have a happy environment. Sometimes it'd be happy. Sometimes we go to the music, take kids to a music park. I mean, a museum, or take kids to a playground or something like that. That could be a happy move. Oh, then we have to go to funeral. You know, we have to. You know, we affected all kinds of ways.
Maybe the word content would be a little more appropriate, but I had another thought I'd like to ask you. If spirituality can inspire music and a way of playing, can it work the other way around? If you decide to play in a manner that you hear Coltrane and others doing, could that lead to spirituality in your own life?
Well, no, the sound is a reflection on how he's feeling in his spiritual awareness. It has nothing to do with the listener, unless the listener is into where he's coming from. But everybody has their own experience. Everybody has their own experience and their own reality. Mm-hmm. Now he might play some stuff reminiscent of the Birmingham bombing. Maybe he's reflecting on that, which might be more solemn or lamenting. You know what I mean? It could be more lamenting, you know. But it might reflect, it might, another person might hear it very romantic. So,
true. Yeah.
You know, depends on it depends on their experience. See, music is abstract, and it's tools that you can use to deal with emotions, but the emotions don't have to conjure up the same realities. You know, what you might project as tension might be a different tension that I might imagine when I hear it. Mm-hmm. You know, it's tension, but it's different. In other words, it might be a tension of a car accident or something. You know. I mean, this is what we deal with. We're dealing with people. Everybody's got their own spiritual way. We was made as individuals. The Creator made us all as individuals. We have our own spirits. We have our own interpretation of the spirit or the God or the Creator. I call it Creator, you know. And we have allegiance to that, you know. It's the same. It's the same source, but everybody has a spirit, a different relationship and concept. Different relationship and concept. But we all come from the same source. Does that make sense?
Yes, and I wonder. I was thinking of some of the late Coltrane, like the Olatunji Center, and you know, very late. And people may listen to that, and one person may think, "What is he so angry about?" And the next person may get a totally different, that he's being ecstatic about. He's having an experience, a spiritual experience.
Yeah.
So I guess it's in the ear of the listener.
Yeah, because everybody perceives different. Perception is different. It was based on your experience. If you haven't experienced what John has experienced, he's projecting these notes and this sound, and he's motivated one way, but you might take it unless he speaks on it, unless he says something. You're gonna take it different, and that's the beauty of sound. It's an attribute of the total creator. It's big. The sound is bigger than all of us. You know what I mean?
You just made me think of something that I should have thought of many years ago, that if he spoke on it, and I wonder now if the Love Supreme record reached so many people because he he announced his intention.
Well, you say Love Supreme?
Yes.
That's spiritual.
It's very spiritual.
But the supreme to you, what does that mean? It might be your supreme, might be different from our supreme, based on our experience, but based on our knowledge of where, based on our knowledge and intellect and intuition. There's a lot of stuff we believe in that we can't really see. We have faith. Faith is belief. We believe in something. It might not be manifested physically, but we believe in it.
Mm-hmm.
That's very important as a musician. I believe these notes is going to take care of me. You know what I mean?
Can you say that? Can you say that again?
I believe these notes that I produce is going to take care of me. And I have to make sure that. That's what I'm always.
That's very quotable, Wendell. That's very quotable.
That's what I'm always chasing these notes. I'm trying to get away.
Chasing the train and chasing the notes.
Yeah, right. Yeah, because I'm harnessing them, trying to capture sound and whatnot with these notes, feeling and stuff like that. And when we talk about making it take care of us, the world we live in now, it has to be harnessed to, of course, nowadays, film, video, TV, CD, CDs, all forms of audio distribution, and we have to make sure that happens in the world we live in today.
Yeah. On that note, I'm gonna pause our recording for a second.